Good evening. Similar to Glenn, I'm going to start off with a short story about me. Seems quite indulgent, but originally I was a Lancashire lad, but nearly 30 years ago I left behind jobs selling loans and making bombs in Lancashire to move to Scotland. Came up there to do voluntary footpath and practical conservation work. Planting trees as well and things like that. Quite a hippie thing to do, so I grew my hair. It was long and blonde. My hair used to come down to the bottom of my back. When I had it cut off, people didn't recognise me. That's not dissimilar to a character that Glenn's already mentioned, Alice from Alice in Wonderland. I was going to start my presentation on that theme, but the hair's now gone, so I'm going to start off with a tweet that Glenn did earlier this year, which does actually pay homage to Alice in Wonderland. Now, it's not often that an overweight, grey, middle-aged male like me gets the opportunity to compare himself to Keanu Reeves. But when Glenn came around the country with the CIHT Futures project, I found I had a choice before me. Do I keep on doing the same kind of forecasting that I've been doing for the last 20 years, or jump down the rabbit hole with Glenn and explore a wonderland of future making? And just in case anybody doesn't get the reference, it's from a most excellent film called The Matrix. Now, to finish off the story of arriving in Scotland, wanting to be a conservationist, to standing here today, is somewhat analogous to scenario planning and decide and provide. There are things in life over which we have no control and things over which we do have control. When I wasn't able to get paid employment doing practical conservation work, I started doing temping jobs. By chance, I got a job working at a small transport modelling company in Edinburgh called SIAS. No control over that. Bearing in mind my first degree was in chemistry. Was not expecting to end up in transport. But since then, I've been able to exert control over my career and make decisions on what I want to do, and those hippie ideals I had from 30 years ago are still in me, in that I do want the world to be a better place. Thus, it was really exciting to be able to get involved in Scotland's National Transport Strategy Review. Now, a most fortuitous alignment of the planets, or possibly just random chance, saw the CIHT Futures project come to Scotland around the same time as Transport Scotland was given this brief to review our national transport strategy. I looked at that first objective, and staring right at me was a perfect opportunity to try out, decide and provide. Set out an updated vision for the future, not forecast what the demand for travel or respond to the demand for transport, etc., but set out an updated vision. In my eyes, this was tailor-made for a decide and provide approach. Now, I hope you're all paying attention to Glenn's presentation, because I am going to talk about the 6 stages that he's already talked about. However, because we in Transport Scotland were hitting the ground running 2 years ago, whilst Glenn was still putting all this together, we're getting to the same endpoint, but on a slightly different route. I think that's not a bad thing, because a paradigm change in approach to transport planning needs us to explore different ways of achieving the same goals. As you'll see from my quick overview of what we've done, it'll be similar, but not the same. So, the preferred future, or what we've called the vision for transport in Scotland, was actually developed independently of the work on scenario planning. This draft vision here is then further developed into a number of themes, with each theme further described with 3 outcomes. We have 4 themes, and therefore we have a total of 12 outcomes. Separate from the development of the vision, themes and outcomes, Transport Scotland commissioned Sistra and Glenn to help us develop a scenario planning process and a scenario planning tool. Together, we identified the important and uncertain drivers of future demand. From a prior list of around 150 ideas that we gathered from a user group in Scotland, we whittled this down to a more manageable group of about 33 things that we thought would drive uncertainty, and we took those to a workshop where we were looking at the key drivers of uncertainty. This is the workshop. If I can draw particular attention to the item on the left-hand side, this was very important in getting people to focus. They weren't allowed to touch them until they'd agreed what drivers of uncertainty were both important and uncertain. Carrot and stick, very important. We then use combinations of these drivers of an uncertain future to construct a number of without policy plausible futures. Glenn did mention that. I would like to briefly comment on the phrase without policy plausible future. Is it possible to have a future without policy? Arguably, that's implausible. But if we're going to have policies which are going to shape the future, we need to have a counterfactual without the policy included to be able to assess those policies. And that's what I've been doing, is a lot of work on the assessment of policies. And this is where the scenario planning process and tool came in. The development of those and the assessment of the policies have been one of the most intellectually stimulating and enjoyable parts of my career to date. I obviously don't have time to describe all of that work in a 10-minute response to Glenn, but I am hoping that our paper is accepted at the European Transport Conference in October, where I'll have time to go through it all in more detail. So, I'm now going to have to do the Blue Peter trick of jumping past a lot of the excellent work done by Glenn, the team at Systra, and also a team at PBA, now part of Stantec, I think I have to say that contractually, who are helping to do the policy assessment work. So here's one I prepared earlier of what the output of that work is starting to look like. For those of you paying attention, it looks a lot like Glenn's Stage 5. Down the left, we have our outcomes. That was on the slide earlier. 12 outcomes, that's what forms part of the vision. Across the top, we've got our 8 plausible futures. We've used red, white, and blue rather than red, amber, green because one of the team was colorblind. So red is getting worse than it is today, blue is getting better than it is today, white is more or less stays about the same. Independent, again, of the work we did on the scenario planning, other colleagues at Transport Scotland were working with AECOM and PBA again, were generating what Glenn described at Stage 4, the options. Where Glenn used the term policy options, we instead have settled on the term measures, but it's all just semantics really, it's not that important. There are currently just under 40 draft measures which are being assessed for how they deliver against the National Transport Strategy, vision and outcomes. What this table shows is a combination of a scenario with the measure in place and how that compares to now in respect of delivering each outcome. I would stress this is not a final and it's still an interim stage as we're still very much working on this project. Whilst this looks like a simple table of coloured boxes, once you get your head around it, it actually gives you a really rich understanding of how far we may need to push a measure or option, however you want to call it, to try and help us deliver the vision and outcomes that we're wanting. I'll be honest, it takes way too long to try and explain the different boxes and things, but once you get your head around it, it is great. No one measure is going to deliver on all the outcomes, and different futures will need different measures to be brought forward at different times and with different intensities. It's not easy stuff to work through, but with an increasingly uncertain future for transport, there aren't going to be easy answers. Where I hope we end up with is a national transport strategy which will be flexible and nimble enough to respond to an increasingly uncertain future where we are both mitigating against risk and exploiting emerging opportunities. That's Glenn's Stage 6. See, it is all joining together. We are getting to the same place. What next? As we continue to work on updating the National Transport Strategy, we're also kicking off the Strategic Transport Projects Review, or in Scotland we call it STPR, which is an awful lot easier than saying Strategic Transport Projects Review every time. This was first done back in 2008, not long after the publication of our original National Transport Strategy, and as we're updating that, we need to update what is effectively the infrastructure delivery plan for the strategy. Scenario planning will be repeated for the STPR. The strategic business case for each project will be appraised using our Scottish Transport Appraisal Guidance. This already has guidance on dealing with uncertainty and creating an uncertainty log and doing scenarios. However, that has typically focused on aspects of local uncertainty, like local developments, is that development going to go in there or not? So I want to bring the scenario planning process into that next stage of the development of infrastructure cases. I explained earlier that for the National Transport Strategy, we developed a scenario planning tool. That is a fairly simple spreadsheet which takes less than a minute to run. A simple model, though, only gives you very limited outputs. STPR is creating strategic business cases, so we're going to have to employ our heavyweight transport models. Those take days rather than minutes to run. So how will we practically apply the scenario planning process to the STPR? I don't know. But God, I'm looking forward to it. I've quite a few ideas, but I expect that as we found for the National Transport Strategy, we will have to adapt and innovate as we go. I am confident that we'll find a way to use the process, and importantly, that the output of the STPR will be far better informed for using scenario planning, with all the same benefits that it will bring to the National Transport Strategy about mitigating risks and exploiting opportunity. Right, to finish. One of my favourite aphorisms, generally attributed to Isaac Newton, is, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." For the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of metaphorically standing on Glenn's shoulders. In my eyes, he is truly a giant in this field. Now, for anyone not aware, this seemingly mild-mannered, bespectacled professor by day is a hardcore heavy metal rocker by night. It is my intention one day to attend a heavy metal gig with Glenn and move from the metaphorical to the literal and actually stand on his shoulders instead as well. But more seriously, though, I would sincerely like to thank Glenn and the CIHT for the CIHT Futures project. It really has made the last 2 years the most exciting of my career and has been well worth my annual subscription, probably for my lifetime, which I'm sure will make Sue happy. Thank you very much.